So yeah, thank you one more time. Before we get going, I want to introduce Morimoto. She was Osaka born and Manhattan raised. Mari never strayed far from urbanity until she spent 9 years at Cornell. In fact, Dr. Morimoto, who has a real job as a big city veterinarian, and this often wars with her moonlighting as a freelance manga translator. She got her foot in the door with Viz Media through luck and circumstance. I like that. And since then has expanded her resume to include panelist, panel leader, guest of honor, personal assistant and interpreter, and guest of honor at several Northeast conventions. She's also contributed several articles to the English edition of Shonen Jump. A highlight of her translating career was meeting and rubbing elbows with Dragon Ball creator Akira Toriyama, as a child she had the honor of meeting the late Osamu Tezuka. Her current titles are Naruto, Inuyasha, and Dragon Eye, but she's also previously translated Dragon Ball, My Son Ikoku, One Pound Gospel, Knights of the Zodiac, and Digi Charat Anthology. So, Morimoto.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. That's actually a slightly old bio, because those of you who are rabid Naruto fans know Naruto has now ended, and we now continue the saga with his son Boruto. But a couple of questions for you guys first. Are there any minors in the crowd? No, seriously, because there's some lewdness in the slides. Second, how many of you are actually actively taken or understand some amount of Japanese? Okay, because I have some slides that compare Japanese and English side to side. And then lastly, do we have any graphic arts design type people in the crowd? Oh good, not too many. Please hold your jeers and cringes to the end. I am not proficient with PowerPoint, and I thought PowerPoint could do what Photoshop could, and it can't. And I learned this the hard way last night. So this is a partial bibliography of mine. As you can see, there's some titles that were not mentioned, and they actually span a number of different publishers. And then I also interpret, and in terms of terms and definitions, translation is the written word, taking one language and source language and putting it into the target language. Interpretation is the spoken word. What's interesting is the kanji. Honyaku, translation. Hon doesn't actually mean book. It actually means flip. But it sounds cool to say honyaku, you're translating written things. And then interpreting, it's tsuyaku, translating on the fly or in transit. In the manga business, there's literal translation. That's usually the first pass, straight, often dry, stilted, depending on the ability of the translator, what the publisher or client is requiring. Word for word translation. Then you have rewriting. That is taking a literal translation and making it more readable, read more smoothly. Some people also use adaptation. Some people use them interchangeably, but adaptation also takes into account, at least in the manga field, that you're making it sound comic speak, i.e. US American comics. So in the old days, you had a translator who then hand off the script to the rewriter or the adapter, who then hands it into the editor. Sometimes the editor edits it first, sometimes the letter letters it first, and then it gets edited. Now, a lot of times the translator, including myself, we also adapt. Some, and I don't do this, I wish I did because I would get more money, they even letter. And then it goes to the editor. I am really sorely pressed because this is my badge from Anime Boston, from which I just came back, where I was listed as a Japanese guest translator. Interpreter is the right term. And just to let you know, the top photos from New York Comic Con 2015, where I interpreted and translated both, for Naruto creator Masashi Kishimoto, who is on the right. And then to the left was his editor at the time. And then the bottom picture, the gentleman in the middle is actually Haruo Nakajima, who was the suit actor of the original Godzilla. So those of you who've seen all the old, Showa era Godzilla movies, you might not recognize him because he was inside the suit, but that's him. So jumping straight into some of the technical aspects and what is difficult about translating is a lot of times you have dialect issues. There's a huge body of controversy. You can ask about 10 translators how they would translate Kansai or Western dialect into English. Most of us, including myself, use the United States Southern accent because Osaka accent is kind of slow and has slight drawl, but some people are offended by that. I think I have a claim to say I can use Southern accent because I am born in Osaka, I am an Osaka person, so I think I would know. One of the other things you might notice about this slide is that it's flipped. This was Ayako, and Vertical, for some of its major titles, flipped it to make it more accessible to readers who are not necessarily used to reading it the Japanese way, which, like British and driving and Japanese and driving, is the opposite side. Here's some more. What's interesting here is the light-haired character is singing a song. Oftentimes, now that we have Google and other search methods that are internet-driven, it's gotten a lot easier to look things up. But one of the things that Vertical did was to include side notes at the bottom of the page, so that people who want to look up the song or look up the reference can do so at their leisure. And then we've got Sailor Moon short stories. This was Kogyaru. Anyone familiar with Kogyaru? It was a subculture of girls' fashion, and they essentially speak what I call Japanese Valley girl speak, like, oh my god. And so for the entire chapter, which thank god it was a short chapter, I had to be like, oh my god, and think about how Valley girls, I'm not a Valley girl. I had to look up some of these terms. And the other interesting thing is there are very specific terms, one of which, I guess, is there a pointer on this thing?
Yes, the same.
The top?
Yep.
Okay. Oops.
I lied. I thought I lied. Yeah, that one.
Oh, this one?
Yep.
So there's a term here, hageru. Hageru, for most of you who learn basic Japanese, means to go bald. Not in this case. It's short for we went Haagen-Dazsing. We went to get ice cream. There's also chikiru. Chikiru is short or long for chicken or Kentucky Fried Chicken. We went and got Kentucky Fried Chicken. So there's all these other factors that you got to know or you got to find out when you're translating things. The other thing is they liked fashion, and a lot of authors do this because they don't want to impeach on third-party or violate third-party copyright issues. They'll change a brand name slightly so they don't get sued. So here, Gucci became Guccici. And there was another one which I am trying to see if I can find. There's Guccici. Oh, and Chanel became Channel, like the TV channel. Speech mannerisms. Naruto had a lot of them. One of the caveats I had at the very beginning, I did not start Naruto. I came in the middle, towards the end of volume 1. And Naruto has a lot of speech mannerisms. The main character and some of the other ones, they did not all get translated at the time. In one of the guidebooks that later came out that also got translated into English, there was a poll. How many times did this character say this particular speech mannerism in the first 5 chapters? Well, we couldn't really put out that page because the word count was off from between the English and the Japanese because we never translated some of those speech mannerisms. Here though, the character Konohamaru says, "Kore kore kore, urusai zo kore," and he says, "Quit saying A because A is his mannerism." He's like, "You're copying my mannerism." And Boruto's like, no man, I was just saying A as an emphasis. The worst, hardest, trickiest thing was, for those of you who are familiar with Naruto, there's a character called Killer Bee, who's a rapper. Now, my understanding is Kishimoto Sensei is not a rapper. I am not a rapper. My editor's not a rapper. And what was even trickier, of course, is raps involve rhyming. So not only do we have to preserve the meaning of the line, but we had to also make sure that the line endings also matched and rhymed. So I think we did a decent job, but it was really tricky, and there's some lines further down the line that just killed me. Here's a couple more. What really sucked was this one. He talks about being a Texas Longhorn by saying "Teki o sasu." I stab my enemy and I'm a Texas Longhorn. That doesn't work in English. So that Texas part got completely left out. So words that don't mean the same in another language. Here we have the word softo. Softo did derive from software, but it currently means like a video game cartridge. So that's why we went with I want the next new game too. If any of you speak Italian, when you toast, you say chin chin. Well, that's a baby word for penis in Japanese. A lot of times at international conferences, that often causes twitters. And then in French, preservatif means condom. So if you want your food without preservatives, don't say sans preservatif because you're saying you want your food without condoms. This is a common one. I'm sure there's some of you speak Spanish. Embarazada. Don't say you're embarazada to mean you're embarrassed. It means you're pregnant. Especially for the men out there. You don't, that'll be an interesting one. And then a common one, if any of you read the Harry Potter, both in British English and American English, there are words like trainers, which in British means running shoes. In American, or it means American, doesn't mean much in American English, sorry, I wrote that wrong. But in Japanese, it also means something completely different. It means sweatshirt. I love B-side label. They make the funniest, cutest stickers. They're available in several areas of Japan. But this is where they take sound puns and put pictures on them too. Like Torama means trauma, but also you can make it up with Tora, tiger, and Uma, horse, or Toraburu, tiger and bulldog. And then this is one of the lewd slides, but there's a perfect scene from Cage of Eden here where the person is talking about nation building. So the way I would have translated is, what about country? I want you to, and insert C word here, that sounds similar to country. The editor actually did it really well where it still captured the essence of it and was still a little bit offensive, but not to the sexual nature that the original did. But this also brings up a good point. In Japanese, in order to avoid censorship, a lot of times controversial words or brand names or anything that violates a third-party copyright will have blacked out circle, X, anything to not spell out the entire word. Just to let you know, in the original serialization of this title, it was not blacked out, and Kodansha ended up getting a lot of angry fans, maybe parents, writing in saying, why was the term not blacked out? And then I met a young gentleman who draws funny parodies of a queer nature, and he had come up with the idea for a series called Astro Boy. Now, the brilliant thing about this is you can make a pun in Japanese as well, because the original Astro Boy is Tetsuwan Atomu. Well, Tetsu rhymes with Ketsu, which also means ass. So Astro Boy would be Ketsuwan Atomu. I came up with that. But English doesn't need any help being complicated and confusing. This is something that was posted at a certain veterinary college before a reality TV show was filmed. And just to highlight, we will be shooting animals that are in the hospital, walking in the hallways and in the waiting room, i.e. we're going to be filming. Well, what does that mean if you are a client at an animal hospital? You don't want your pet to be killed. And then there's another recent one, an assistant to the mayor of this town outside a major metropolitan area says, please, what you can do what you can to get us high on the agenda of the joint meeting of the House and Senate on marijuana regulation. There's also issues of censorship. Some of you who are One Piece fans may have seen early One Piece where they didn't want to show characters smoking on a kids show, so they transformed them into lollipops. There are also many scenes of child nudity on Dragon Ball, where things like tables, flowers, even underwear were conveniently airbrushed in after the fact. Another thing is titles. They really want to not annoy the religious right. So a title like 666 Satan gets turned into O Parts Hunter. This is a scene from Naruto where I only realized that when I was scanning the images in, that not only did they black out the actual, or white out the actual figures, but they also changed, like, they took away some of the actual, like, the arm here and the leg here to make it less suggestive. And then what was really frustrating is when an anime comes over first and then they pick up the manga for publications, we often have to use the names that are initially used in the anime. And this was especially true for Saint Seiya, otherwise known as Knights of the Zodiac. And this character in particular broke my heart. I happen to be a huge Saint Seiya fan. He was Moses. He parted the seas, but he also represented the whale saint, or whale knight. So what did they change his name to? Not Ahab, not Moby, not Moby Dick, Morris. Morris to me is an orange cat that used to sell 9 lives. So another interesting thing is sound effects. When you translate sound effects, many times the controversy is, do you want to make a sound that doesn't exist in real life? Or do you want to use an onomatopoeia that already exists, like crash, boom, things like that? It depends by the publisher, but also artistically, sometimes you have to match the sound effects to the space used up by the original for titles put out by Viz, for example, because they completely replace the original sound effects with English sound effects, and they tend to use American comics sound effects. Some of them just replace or put in the English right next to the original Japanese. And, you know, some of it is onomatopoeias and some of it's made up ones. Of the sound effect, and only below in parentheses will they put the English equivalent, or what would be the English equivalent. And then you've got, whoops, this one where they actually did make sound art effects out of the sound effects, but still kept the original Japanese. And then finally, you've got some publishers who actually just do not replace the sound effects at all, some of whom actually put an index in the back listing all the sound effects, and some of them who don't. In terms of the flipping, going back a little bit, here some of the tricky things is, this was nice because the original Japanese also had the words romanized, but you know, you can't just automatically flip everything because things don't look right, especially in this one. This is the English only, but notice that he's holding the phone in his left hand. He's actually a right-handed character. And then text already in the target language is always confusing because this was from Cage of Eden, but these are Japanese kids. They wander into a room, they find an epitaph in English. So what do? In this case, the editorial decision was to brush up the English, first of all, to make it sound more like American English would read, but also just to leave it as is and let the readers use their imagination. I mean, this is the final volume and pretty much one of the final chapters in the final volume. So you've read the book, you know that these characters are supposed to be Japanese. So the thought was that it won't cause confusion. Then there's also, here, some of you might know that a lot of times if a foreigner is speaking Japanese, it's written or drawn as if they're speaking katakana. And this character is speaking quote-unquote regular Japanese. It has katakana in it, but he's speaking regular Japanese. So the way that was differentiated was by using different font. Another challenge, though, that this brings up is making sure that your lines fit within the bubbles. In the past, the translator didn't have to worry about that. The rewriter and the editor worried about making things fit or moving things around so they fit in the bubbles. But now it is my job as well. And in series where there isn't a whole lot of dialogue to begin with, that can become a tricky issue. The other thing is what to do with text-heavy pages. Sometimes the decision is to just leave it in the Japanese and put in the relevant parts in English. In this case, God bless the editor, it changed the whole thing. And I was going to look it up to see if I actually provided that translation. I don't remember if I did. If I did, I blacked it out because it was so much work. Honorifics. Sometimes we preserve honorifics. Sometimes it's just written Usui-san. In this case, it was just to make it, again, more localized, it was dropped entirely. And then, same series, this is all from Limit. There was another scene where the character was scratching in text, and the decision in that case was made to leave the Japanese text and just add the romanization to it. Historical context, again, lots of research. Ayako, bane of my existence, because up till that point, because it takes place in immediate post-war Japan. And this was a couple years ago now, so I still didn't have as many internet resources that I would now. There were some incidences where Tezuka actually took situations that actually happened, events that really happened, and put them into his book. And then the tough part, because I couldn't find any sort of reference book that he left behind, is to figure out how much of what he put in the book was real, and how much of it did he take creative license for the sake of his story. Now, that's been eclipsed by Rose of Versailles. Rose of Versailles takes place, it starts with the story of Marie Antoinette before she became Queen of France. She was Archduchess of Austria. Through her marriage to the Dauphin, or the heir to France, becoming Queen of France until her death at the guillotine. But there's a lot of even more things in Rose of Versailles that Ikeda Sensei lifted from actual history, but not necessarily from the right time period, or she took actual historical characters and changed who they were, whose kid they were, who their kid was, to fit her story. So in this frame, this was also talking about the livre, which was the unit of currency. It took me 2 days and a lot of discussion. I had a couple friends who were doing the editing and also the historical accuracy research for me to come up with the best solution of how to translate the livre, because there's no real good equivalency. Sensei provided how much it would be worth in yen, but that was also 1972 yen when the series was first published. So the question was, do we leave it in yen, or, as the decision was, try to figure out some sort of English equivalent, but again, letting people know this is so many dollars in 1972 dollars as far as we can figure out. But this character also, Rosalie, plays an integral part in Rose of Versailles, where it turns out in the story, she's the long lost daughter of one of the main court ladies that is currying favor with Queen Antoinette. But in real life, she was an actual character, but she was Marie Antoinette's maidservant. And then here, there's a bit here about Lafayette and the Marquis de Lafayette, but the character Farazin is sent to America in the book to be Lafayette's aide-de-camp, and he was actually a different military person's aide-de-camp in the actual history. But fortunately, with Rose of Versailles, Sensei herself has put out these reference materials, and the nice thing about the middle thing is it's split down the middle between who is actual historical figure and who is not. But what's still tricky is for the imaginary characters trying to figure out how to properly spell their names, because most of their names are European, especially French, and I am not a scholar of French. Another thing that was interesting is between two different versions of the same bunkobon, or same graphic novel, there was two different terms interspersed. One means Crown Prince, and one means His Majesty the King. And we managed to actually talk to her publisher in Japan to straighten it out. I had my suspicions of which one was correct, and I will leave it to you to look it up when the English finally comes out. But in terms of other things, it doesn't necessarily have to be the author that puts out the reference. What? Only 4 minutes? Ah! Okay, let's skip ahead. So a lot of times we do, for some publishers, we do translator's notes or translation notes. Again, NHK becomes MHK. Kodansha, which is the publisher that actually published Cage of Eden, becomes Kodansha. And let's see. Oh, Saint Onisan, Saint Young Men, great series. It's about Jesus and Buddha coming down to earth and being roomies in Tachikawa, Tokyo. It will be hell if anyone, oh, that was a pun too, but it would be hell to translate because there's all these jokes like Jesus sticks his finger in the ground and out bursts grape Fanta. It's a play on how he creates wine out of water. And then there's a line in Japanese that says the customer is king or the customer is always right. Well, in Japanese, it's customer is God, and of course it's a pun. She doesn't realize that this is Jesus and Buddha that she's talking to. There's a lot of sometimes changes between magazine pages and graphic novel. And then, oh, the animation didn't work here. But this is the rough sketch, the Japanese, and then the English. Oh, I think I am getting towards the end of my slides. So in the old days, how would you get into the industry? Luck and circumstance, persistence. Now, referral, translation competitions like the Manga Translation Battle, open calls. What you need to do is know the language, know the culture, and both cultures, both languages, both cultures, and know which publisher you might want to work for. Different publishers publish different kinds of manga, and it's pretty much the same here in the US. In fact, certain US publishers mainly or solely deal with certain Japanese publishers, so we can talk about it a little bit there. But there's not a lot of money in that for you. If you guys want to go into translation, go into translating medicine, law. You're laughing. I kid you not. Right now, and depending on the field, like law, you can still get away with Japanese to English translation. Medicine, it's more English into Japanese is where the money's at. But unless you are independently wealthy, don't mind being poor, or living where the cost of living is very low, or have a very well-earning spouse or partner, manga translation by itself does not pay. That's why I do my other job too. And then in terms of art imitating art, I was pleasantly surprised. I'm sorry for those of you who are Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fans who haven't caught up. This is like 2 episodes ago when the character Daisy or Quake did a move that reminded me so much of the Rasengan from Naruto. I don't know if it was intentional or, you know, like an homage or not, but it's kind of like where it was art imitating life, except it's not life, it's still a TV show. But this is a lot, but this is my mentor, Bill Flanagan. He also hosts the Lost in Translation panel at San Diego Comic-Con every year. And he's also one of the first generation of manga translators here in the US. But and I learned this is a good segue into our next speaker, but it talks about the voice and how the translator essentially, in many circumstances, chooses what the final product will sound like by choosing what their priorities are. Ideally, the translator should choose what the priorities were or the viewpoint was of the original creator, but that doesn't necessarily happen because we're all human. So, in the end, there's not necessarily any right translation. In any translators panel, they will tell you, you get 10 translators in the room, you might end up with 12 different scripts for the same pages. And there we go.